But I always thought, like, if you're going to try and do something, you need to have at least 2 or 3 of, call it the 5 prerequisite skills required to do whatever that business is. So if you have a background in like B2B enterprise, that's one thing. If you've got a consumer marketing, background. So you have to look at what that business is and what are the core skill sets required to be successful building whatever that business is. And if I don't have at least 2 of those things, in terms of my past experience, I would automatically eliminate it, because it just means the learning curve is too high. And I also don't have the experience to assess whether it's a good or bad idea. When you have no experience, everything kind of looks good. Once you know a little bit about something, then you can be discerning and you can say, wait, no, that actually isn't good for the following reasons, because I learned last time that doesn't work for X, Y, and Z.
Today, we're talking with Brock Pierce, chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation and co-founder of the EOS Alliance, Block One, Blockchain Capital, Tether, and Mastercoin, which is the first ICO. He's an early investor in Bitcoin. He's raised over $5 billion for crypto projects. He's in the Forbes top 20 wealthiest people in crypto. And he ran for the US presidency in 2020 and will be running again in 2024. He founded the IMI exchange, which sold for more than $100 million. He founded ZAM, which was acquired by Tencent in 2012. And he's the founder of more than a dozen companies that I can't even get into in this intro. Today, we'll be talking about his approach to business, crypto, and how he's been able to achieve so many successes in his life to date. Plus, we'll talk about the US presidential race as well. And just quickly before we get started, make sure to go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you get the latest episodes as soon as they're released. Now, let's get into it. Welcome, Brock.
Oh, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you on the podcast. And I was doing a lot of research about, the content of this podcast, and you've done a lot in your life. That's an understatement to say. You started more companies that I can list, and you've done it successly. But it all started back in 1990.
They haven't all worked out.
Well, there's been enough that have worked out, like a lot more than the standard entrepreneur, the standard business person, the standard person. But it all started back in 1992 from the Mighty Ducks with Emilio Estevez. So how did you go from child actor to entrepreneur and then to US presidential candidate? Like that's a pretty good trajectory. So can we start there?
Well, yeah. So I'm originally a kid from Minnesota. And so my mother ended up briefly, or for some time, acting as a casting director in the Minneapolis Twin Cities market. And in Minnesota, companies like Kellogg's, Sears, Target, General Mills, 3M, they're all Minnesota-based companies. And when I was growing up, they would only hire locally for their commercials and their print advertisements. And so my mother, having at least started in that business in some way, which I was a little too young to remember all of this, I booked my first acting job at the age of 3, which eventually led, like a lot of kids from Minnesota, me playing hockey. When Disney came to town in 1990 to film The Mighty Ducks, I booked a role as young Emilio Estevez or Gordon Bombay, opening up the movie. The film eventually came out in 1992. And Disney then brought me to California to shoot Mighty Ducks 2. I moved out to California in early 1994 when I was 13 and kept making movies, eventually starring in some of them. The one that's political was a movie called First Kid, where I starred as the son of the president of the United States of America with Sinbad as my Secret Service agent. Bill Clinton and Sonny Bono had cameos. I got to spend some actual time in the Oval Office. And then by the time I was 16, because I didn't choose to be an actor, I was 3 years old. I just grew up as an actor. I started to ask myself the existential question of who am I? Is this what I want to be doing? Is this my calling? And having been a byproduct of the first generation of kids to have access to computers and the internet, I came to the realization that technology was going to change the world. And I wanted to be a technology or internet entrepreneur. And so I chose to quit acting and to embark on an adventure of entrepreneurialism. And remember, I was 16 at the time, and this is back in 1997, when as a young person starting a business was unheard of. That's something now that, is not so crazy. Yep. But at the time, I was one of the first, if not the first, 16, 17-year-olds to raise real venture capital, perhaps in the world.
So what was that business? What was your first business?
Yeah, having grown up in the entertainment business, and grown up in the media industry, I said, where does media and technology meet? And, we Napster had come out, and we're starting to see people downloading music, and okay, there's video games. What's going to happen to television, and what's going to happen to the film business? And so, having grown up in that period, and this will date me for anyone that's young watching this, but back at the time, we had broadcast television and we had cable television. We didn't even have the ability to record your TV show. That concept didn't exist yet. TiVo and replay hadn't yet been released. This is back in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And
I remember that.
the idea was that we had limited content that only served very broad audiences on broadcast, and then still fairly broad audiences on cable. And with the internet, in theory, we would have unlimited channels. And so my view was that people were going to use their computers, eventually their mobile phones and other things, to receive content. And the idea was that people would eventually create their own content with their camcorders and other digital devices that they would upload, user-generated content, think YouTube, that we would have original content produced for the internet, which we now see in mass. But this was, I think we were the first ones really pursuing this idea at the time, and that we could also license and repurpose content, think, Hulu. And so we were the first company really trying to pioneer sort of video consumption, and that technology had a substantial role in it. And we were so early when we went to meet with the heads of the TV networks and the heads of the movie studios, they looked at us like we were crazy. They're like, no one is ever going to watch, television on their computers. I mean, that's crazy. Not in a million years. That's why they've got TVs. But we were convinced that technology had a role to play in this, and we were right, but we were wrong about timing. At the time, they projected that broadband penetration was going to roll out at a much faster rate than it eventually did. And the US still, sadly, lags behind the rest of the world in this way, but that's another conversation for another time. So fast forward, we raised $88 million. We were one of the hottest startups in the world. We filed our S1 to go public in the fall of 1999. And then when the internet bubble burst in the spring of 2000 and the world came crumbling down and 99 out of 100 businesses failed, we were one of them. And so all of a sudden I'm going, all right, I'm a washed up actor. I'm a college dropout, and I'm a now failed internet entrepreneur. What am I going to do with my life? And I said, well, I'm going to get up and try doing it again. And I decided that, having played games and seen the emergence of, virtual worlds, and been a Magic the Gathering player and, baseball card collector and all these things, I said, wow, these new massively multiplayer games, these virtual worlds, these virtual countries, they're going to have economies, and people are going to buy and sell these digital assets, these NFTs, and this digital currency. And so I embarked on that mission, and that's what I spent most of my 20s doing.
Yeah, right. And so you went from that to really ramping up the number of companies that you founded and invested in over the time. What changed, in terms of the velocity of the opportunities that you were creating? Because something must have changed, because not everybody has done as many things as you've done in their whole life. So what was your mindset?
Well, I have this sort of insatiable appetite to learn and to do. I never really have idle hands. I keep myself very busy, probably to a fault. I'm never as well rested as I could be. I don't get the breaks that I probably should take because I'm consistently committing myself to things, and I take my commitments seriously. So I'm getting better and better at not overcommitting and committing to the wrong things, but making sure that whatever energy I'm expending is, creating some hopefully positive output. And so I just kept doing more and more things because I kept seeing how the world, this connects to that and that connects to this. And you keep seeing the interconnectedness of all things and how ecosystems work. And rather than me, kind of carving out this one niche because I saw an opportunity, I started looking at all the things that interconnect with that. And then I kept working my way up and down the value chain to understand more and more. I mean, there's so many things that we did during virtual currency that, I've never really even talked about. We helped build out one of the first largest affiliate networks in the world. Had I double clicked just on that one thing, so we built out an affiliate network for ourselves. And this is at the beginning of affiliate sort of marketing on the internet. I could have created a whole nother business just out of that and built one of the first affiliate, sort of marketing networks or agencies on the internet. And we did 100+ million. I think we were probably the first company in the world to do that on the internet. There's so many things that are not even part of the story, but that's where I didn't pursue it because I didn't see that as kind of core and strategic. One of the things I did do, so what we were doing is we were making a market for digital currency in games. And so at first I was teaching people how to play games professionally, because if you were really good, you could make, $500 a day, $1,000 a day. And I learned very quickly that I couldn't scale that. I would need tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And I'm like, well, I'm not gonna be able to do that in an office. How am I gonna handle it? Well, I'm gonna have to basically go teach the world that they can play video games and make money. And I'm like, well, where in the world are there a lot of people where, making a couple $100s a day would be so exciting that they would drop everything they're doing. I'm like, well, probably in the developing world. So what part of the developing world? I'm like, well, India. Well, in India, the parents really discourage the kids from playing video games. So it's not really a gaming culture. I'm like, well, maybe Eastern Europe. Okay, looks interesting. Latin America, China. Yeah, China has this really gaming culture. I'm like, yeah, China's got a lot of people. China seems like the right place. I'm going to move to China. And so I've never been to China in my life, never been to Hong Kong in my life, and just jumped out of a plane, flew over to Hong Kong, opened up the yellow pages and said, how do you get an office? How do you hire people? Rolled up my sleeves and started building a company. And so we did that. And so we eventually built up a supply chain of about 400,000 people, principally in China, that would play these video games professionally to mine currencies that we would then sell all over the world. And I'm like, well, how do I get more customers? Well, there's all these websites that give you information about the games. And at the time, because again, this is 2001, 2, and 3, you didn't have that Google box that you could put on your website and Google just makes money for you and sends you a check. None of that existed yet on the internet. And so if you were a subscale internet website, meaning you had less than 10 million page views a month, which is a substantial number, basically there was no way to monetize. There was no way to generate revenue. You needed basically at least 10 million page views for what you'd call an ad network to consider signing you up and to sell ads for you. And so if you had 1 million or 2 million page views, it was so crazy in 2002 and 3 that you lost a lot of money, because there was no way. You'd put a button on your website and please donate to us. But with all that traffic, your hosting fees were really expensive. And so recognizing this, I could have gone and advertised with all these websites. But instead of advertising, I just said, are you guys making any money? They're like, no, we're losing $2,000 a month. This was a hobby. I was just a big fan of the game. And so I made websites and did this stuff. And now everybody's coming to it. Now it's costing me a fortune. I can't afford to keep it up. I'm like, well, how about I buy it and you get to just keep running it autonomously? And so I did 30 or 40, maybe even 50 acquisitions, rolling up all the gaming websites at the time so that we got the critical mass. And that was called the ZAM network. Which ended up becoming a top 100 web property in the world in terms of traffic. Wow. And that was, how do you advertise your services? Well, you build up the biggest media property. And so it was just, you just keep kind of going, let's go left, let's go right. What connects with this? What connects with that? Learned a lot about payment systems. We were PayPal's largest merchant for years. We launched Alipay in China. We were Google's largest advertiser for a brief moment, because when Google first launched their advertising, we were one of the first people to use it. And at the time, mainstream companies didn't use Google. To be the largest advertiser in the world on Google at that time, you needed to spend $1 million a month because this is back in the beginning of Google.
That's 1 cent click days.
Yeah, these were the early days. And I'm just so honored to have had an opportunity. these are kind of like wild things to have been there and said, wow, this Google advertising thing's going to be a big deal, and be one of the first people to adopt it in a big way. And then driving PayPal, and then, Alibaba or Taobao at the time, they came to us and they said, wow, you're the primary driver of new customers to PayPal after eBay. And we really need you to basically launch this new Alipay platform. And I chat with them and I'm like, yeah, but I don't know why I would do that. And they're like, what do you mean? I go, well, the reason why my business does billions and billions of dollars in sales is because, we're a good market maker. We know how to buy and sell and do all these sorts of things. But it's ultimately because I have access to all the international payment systems and I have English customer support. If I enable Alipay, a Chinese payment system, to connect with the whole world, that will allow my entire supply chain to potentially, sell directly everywhere else. And I'm not sure why I would, basically king make you and enable your success. It probably undermines my business, and there's no offense. I'm being honest about it. I don't know why I would make that happen. And they're like, well, what do we have to do for you to help make Alipay successful? Do what you did for PayPal. I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're like, just tell us what you want. I'm like, well, if you give me an exclusive on all digital assets in perpetuity, then I would help you do that. They're like, done. And so I entered into an agreement which they violated, which is probably a $10+ billion damage. And by the way, they violated it pretty quickly. As soon as we launched them and drove them all their users, they basically said, so much for honoring an agreement.
That's not very nice. Yeah, that's not very nice. So it sounds like your strategy is that you want to basically be part of the entire ecosystem, and you connect the companies which you start or which you found or which you create. And so you want to touch every part of a consumer's journey as part of that system. Would that be fair to say?
But it's less about what I want. It's more intellectual curiosity. And so my money doesn't really motivate me. It's not like, oh, I want to own this or I want to make all this money. I'm just genuinely curious. How does this work? And, can I make it better? And most of the things that I've done and do are also things that have never been done before. I'm really interested in venturing into the unknown. I like to think that I see beyond reality as it exists. I don't see the world for what it is. I see the world for what it can be. And that's really what it is that fascinates me. And you'll notice with each of those stories, being a very early adopter to something or pioneering something that hadn't yet existed.
Okay. And I mean, I've got the preparation I've done, so I have all these questions, but we're going to jump around now because this is opening up some great conversations. That fits really well into you being in blockchain, because blockchain is the next version of the internet, just like in a simplistic way of saying it, right? And so when did you first see the vision for blockchain?
Well, I wouldn't have called it a vision for blockchain, but prior to Bitcoin, having been doing all of this work with virtual currency, people were coming to me and talking to me about, can we build community currencies? And I spent a lot of time understanding frequent flyer programs and, gambling-based currencies and I spent a lot of time, this was my business, to understand. And as we, what are the other markets I could expand into? And so the concept of Bitcoin or something like it was something that I'd already been focused on, but it wasn't really until 2012, because, I'd have conversations with people about Bitcoin and they'd say, what do you think? I said, well, I mean, it's clearly the future, that or something like it. I just don't know if the future is now or, 25 years from now. I learned that in my first business experience, this concept of market timing. I got it wrong the first time. I generally haven't gotten it. I'm early, but not so early that I've failed entirely as a result of it. And so I wait and I'm patient until I see enough data points that says, okay, it's happening. But it was in 2012 where I'm like, all right, I see critical mass. I see all this, the early signals that I needed to see were there. And I'm like, okay, the future is now. This is happening. And that's when I dropped everything I was doing. That's when I started to unwind. I had call it 10 different businesses that I was working on. and where I started to unwind those things as fast as I possibly could, or at least my commitment of time to them, so that I could devote 100% of my energy to what has become this movement.
And so you saw that critical mass 9 years ago. I think if you ask the general population of, the world, it was 3 years ago. And so you were there way, way, way early, and you put everything into it. And you must have seen something in that other people hadn't seen, to be able to be so a business about it, because it has a general, but back in the day, when it was 60 cents for a coin or whatever it was, and it fluctuated because Goldman Sachs was purchasing and selling and all that type of stuff. That was back 8-9 years ago. And you were all invested at that point. And so where do you see it going eventually? Because obviously, to stop all your businesses and to focus on this one area, which has worked out really well for you, by the way, that's a big risk. But you were so convinced about it that you went all in on it. So what convinced you about it? And, where do you see it, eventually going?
Well, again, remember the decade prior to this, I had spent my entire decade focused on, virtual currency and digital currencies and games, and where we were testing economic theories in virtual countries. My main investor in 2005 or 2006, it closed in January, was Goldman Sachs Principal Strategies. This was the division of Goldman that ran their proprietary trading. They were responsible for generating 40% of the profits of Goldman Sachs. I was the first private investment they ever made, because they took a look at what I was doing and they're like, you're managing the economy for 1,300 countries? In some ways, this is more complex than the global financial system. Who are you? Mm-hmm. And so, for anyone that had a background in game currencies, we saw this much faster than everyone else because we had spent 10 years basically preparing ourselves. The idea of a digital currency existing in the world, duh. For those of us that had already done all that legwork. And that's why founders like Jesse Powell, the founder of Kraken, he had started one of the companies back in the day with us, Loot.com. Roger Ver came in as a part of that. Mt. Gox was a Magic the Gathering online exchange. So there's a lot of us that were the early builders of the ecosystem that came out of gaming, that we came out of the game currency side of the market. Then obviously you had, the cryptocurrency cypherpunks, and there were a few different groups that came at this from a different perspective. But yes, anyone that came out of the game currency space at least should have recognized that this idea was viable. Enough to the point to have taken it seriously, and hopefully seriously enough that you at least bought some. I hope you all did. The early adoption of cryptocurrency, and this is something that is lost on most people, most of the early buyers of cryptocurrency, when we talk about the large numbers, right, the mass adoption, they were all online gamers. It's why South Korea and China, the largest online gaming markets in the world, were the biggest trading markets in the world for a long time. We, the gamers, were the ones that figured this out fastest because we didn't have the learning curve of what digital currency? What's that? Why would I want that? If you were in a game and you'd already been buying it and selling it, you're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So I think it's a quick aside to all the parents who are concerned that their children are playing games or that they're on their phones too much. This is what can happen as a result of that, because I remember the Magic the Gatherings and Second Life and all these huge games, and all the parents were really upset at the kids for playing it their whole life, but it's changed the world and it's led to this huge shift in the economy of the world. But I think it's got some time to go still, because obviously there's established players in the game. But I mean, even in the last 3-4 months, it's really starting to skyrocket. But let's jump to your mindset and your approach to business, because obviously, well, not obviously, but you have started a number of successful companies. Yeah. I'm sure you've started some that haven't been successful, of course, right? But the success rate is generally high. How do you, or what do you look for in an opportunity before you invest in it?
Well, from an investment perspective, or
found it or start it or just put something into it.
I mean, for me, and this is again to each their own, I'm interested in things that are novel. If many people are doing it, I don't really feel the need to like get in on that. It's like, all right, a bunch of people are doing it. Great. Good luck. How can I help you? If there's any advice I can provide, wonderful. But that normally doesn't excite me. I'm interested in novel things, just in terms of where, because you have to have, like an investment mandate. You have to choose for yourself. And this is advice I'd give for everyone. Like, choose your parameters of like, what are you willing to do and what are you not willing to do? Because once you've started to like have that process, it's very easy to then eliminate things that don't fit, which then allows you to devote more time and energy to those things that do fit into the parameters of what you're willing to do, right? And so for me, I don't really want to do things where I don't have some experience. Now that's starting to change since I moved to Puerto Rico, but we'll save that conversation for a moment.
Yep.
But I always thought, like, if you're going to try and do something, you need to have at least 2 or 3 of, call it the 5 prerequisite skills required to do whatever that business is. So if you have a background in like B2B enterprise, that's one thing. If you've got a consumer marketing, background. So you have to look at what that business is and what are the core skill sets required to be successful building whatever that business is. And if I don't have at least 2 of those things, in terms of my past experience, I would automatically eliminate it, because it just means the learning curve is too high. And I also don't have the experience to assess whether it's a good or bad idea. When you have no experience, everything kind of looks good. Once you know a little bit about something, then you can be discerning and you can say, wait, no, that actually isn't good for the following reasons, because I learned last time that doesn't work for X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And so, I'd like to have some of the prerequisite skills. If it's an investment in other things, it's even less important, the idea. The most important thing is the people. Mm-hmm. What has allowed me to be successful a number of times is ultimately, sort of tenacity. It's the ability to get up every day and just keep working and grinding, at a particular problem. When they say it's like 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration, they're not really wrong. It looks like overnight success to everyone on the outside, but that's because you didn't see the 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears that normally went into making whatever that was successful. Unfortunately, I've never seen anyone build a business where it was really easy. Sometimes it's easier than other times. Sometimes you have less headwind, less almost failing multiple times, running out of money, all the things that often happen through that process. But you have to really be committed. A lot of people look at entrepreneurship and they're like, oh yeah, I want to start my own business because I want to be my own boss. I want to work my own hours. Let me tell you, when you're the founder, basically everyone is your boss.
And you work unlimited hours.
And you work on limited hours. So just to put it out there, but there is a reward. It's very rewarding. It's normally not rewarding monetarily, because most of the time you fail. That's just it is the real odds. And most people become entrepreneurs out of naivety to some degree, because if they actually knew how much risk they were really taking, how much work it would ultimately be, and that you're probably not going to get paid and run out of money and all the other things, you probably wouldn't do it. But it is ultimately really rewarding, because it's so empowering to like be responsible, for your own success to some degree, right? Obviously, you've got luck and a whole lot of other factors that contribute to that, timing and otherwise, and making the right connections But it is a wonderful adventure, but it's not for the faint of heart.
And so you like to go into areas that are novel, and you like to have the expertise of 3 out of 5 things that are going to contribute to its success. How do you have so many wins in novel areas? Because that's the highest areas of potential failure, right? Is that it's something new, it's something big, it's something that's going to change things. So many things can go wrong. It's hard enough to succeed when it's an existing enterprise, it's an existing market, everything's there, and you can just be a bit better. But when it's novel, the rules aren't there. So how do you ensure the above average success which you've achieved?
Well, it comes from having done it, most of my life at this point, right? The first time, I had a vision of kind of how the world was going to be used. I was right in the end, but I didn't have any experience in assessing that. But what that did is after the fact, and by the way, after that first business failed, it was still years later before that idea ultimately worked with YouTube and others. So I didn't have any of that validation yet that I was right. I still believed I was right. I was still convinced I was right, though I had no evidence of it. And instead, I looked at these gaming worlds, and I'm like, I actually think that lots of people are going to play in these things, and I think that these currencies are going to matter. And again, I had an accurate view. But once you do it once, and then twice, and then three times, again, it's like Malcolm Gladwell in your 10,000 hours. I spend my time living in the future, right? I'm viewing the world, a little bit ahead of where it is right now. And once you spend decades of your life, kind of operating in that mindset and constantly looking at the world for where it's going, you start to get good at it. It's almost like you have a crystal ball. You can almost see around corners. I know what's going to happen before it happens. But to break it down in a logical, rational sense, so it doesn't sound so, foo-foo, a lot of it is also data. What happens is I'm on the forefront. And so because I'm there, I'm constantly getting all sorts of data, and I'm looking at early indicators. Back to, like I said, why I stopped everything I was doing in 2012 to move into the cryptocurrency and blockchain space eventually full time is because I was watching the data. And I don't need a whole lot of data at this point for my intuition to say, okay, this is working. I'm making decisions off of very limited information. But when you spend decades making decisions off of very limited information, you get good at making decisions with very little information and with a high degree of accuracy. And that's to give you the real logical sort of rational breakdown as to how I really do it.
Yeah, sure. Sorry?
Instead of, I got a crystal ball.
Oh, yeah. No, of course. And that intuition part is so true because especially after like a long time in business, you just feel things and you're very confident about them. And it sounds like because of all the things that you've done, you're very confident in certain areas. But you started off in the acting game, then you went into the internet game, then you went into the blockchain game. And in 2020, you ran for president and you're doing it again in 2024. What are you hoping to achieve from the experience?
Yeah, so, the last decade has been, in the helping to move cryptocurrency, blockchain, and a lot of these technologies that philosophically can drive financial inclusion in the world, that can bring transparency to the world, that can start to solve for governance-related issues, that can improve democracy, a whole host of things. Having spent a decade doing that, I'm recognizing how we're building this new parallel system. The question is, how are the old and the new going to come together? Are those incumbent systems going to be at odds with these new systems? Obviously, that wouldn't be a very good thing because we're not talking about like startups right now. We're talking about with fundamental, changes in the way that society and government and business functions. And so one of the roles that I've played in the industry for a long time is I spent time with governments and I spent time with banks and I spent time with major institutions that were fearful of cryptocurrency back in 2013 and 14 and 15. And I would help them understand that you don't need to be afraid. People's first reactions to things to things they don't know is fear. Is it going to eat me, right? And so you fear that which you don't understand. But how do you conquer fear? You conquer fear with knowledge. And so I provided people with sufficient knowledge and information to get them comfortable that, I don't need to freak out or react in a way that could be harmful because I truly believe that these things are necessary. And I view my role in that regard is to kind of build a bridge between the old and the new as the world sort of changes. Because I think the world is changing and it's going to change rapidly and it's going to change in a very big way. And I hope to see an evolutionary event over a revolutionary event because revolutionary events tend to be chaotic and violent and, let's evolve if we can do that. And so that's the real reason why I've gotten into politics. My running for president last year or in the 2020 election cycle clearly I had no intention of winning in that election. It was an exploratory mission to understand the mechanics of the system, to understand how things work. And so I view that as my trial run, my basic training. And I'd say my basic training is complete. I understand the system to some degree. I understand how it works, ballot access issues. I've been inside the belly of the beast.
And what have you learned from it? What are some of the lessons? Because it's so interesting. That's some parts so interesting.
Well, one part of it is that the system is rigged. And this is not to point fingers at anyone. This is just how systems evolve. And so if you want to run for president as a Democrat or a Republican, you need 25,000 petitions or signatures. As an independent candidate, you need 700,000. And the number continues to go up. I could talk to you for an hour about this stuff, but I think that stat kind of says it all. And that is where Democrats and Republicans don't agree on a whole lot. But one of the things that they do agree upon is that they don't want anyone else competing.
And what are you going to bring from your business career and all the lessons that you've learned and all your successes to the presidential campaign?
Well, I think one of the things that I can bring to public service is my background in trying to have a vision of the future. Clearly, technology is changing the world, and it's going to change the world more and more rapidly. And I think one of the things that we need is visionary leadership that are not making decisions by looking at the past or through the rear view mirror, but actually have the foresight to know how to navigate the challenging but opportunistic road ahead. And I think this is an area where I can be very helpful. One of the things, not to step back, but it's worth noting, one of the things that I did during my tenure, not that I'm out of it, but within, call it the cryptocurrency and blockchain space, is back in 2013-14, I recognized that the same technology, blockchain that makes Bitcoin possible, could be used for government-issued currencies. And so we started a company called Tether, where we invented the first ever stablecoin, where we put the US dollar on the blockchain. That system is doing $150 billion a day right now in transactional volume. It's at a $50-60 trillion a year runway rate. It has higher trading volumes than any cryptocurrency. It's kind of a massive deal when you start thinking about how technology is going to impact the monetary system of the world, and how technology can be used by central banks to upgrade their currencies. And this matters in the sense that, like, China has just launched the Chinese digital yuan using this technology to challenge the US dollar's reserve status in the world. Most people don't know this, but if the US economies and the US dollar's reserve status were to change, we'd go from being, call it a $120 trillion economy to maybe a $12 trillion economy, meaning everything in this country might lose 90% of its value very quickly. I mean, this would be the US dollar, whether you like it or not, is the foundation of our nation. It's the foundation of our nation's economy, at least. And these are the sorts of things that I spend a lot of time, concerned about. And what can we do? And okay, if things are going to change, what's the process of change? How do we do these things in a way that create as pleasant or as smooth a transition as possible? And I wish I could promise people a smooth transition, but unfortunately the road ahead is going to be a bit of a bumpy or a rough ride. I just encourage everyone to have faith and kind of breathe through it and remember to stay present and that love is the answer.
And I mean, you're up against the Republican and the Democratic parties. What strategies are you going to use to be able to compete with them? Because I'm assuming it's going to be pretty challenging in 2024. What kind of approaches in terms of business or strategies just from business, like any advanced ideas that will help you to cut through that challenging landscape? Because I'm sure it's going to be very challenging.
Well, I'm not definitively running in 2024 yet. It's a little too early to make that final determination.
Well, if you do, so hypothetically, if you were, what would you do, and how would you, just leverage like your unique talents and capabilities to get the message out there?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm already doing that. Obviously, by running for president last time, I put a stake in the ground that said, hey, I'm committing myself. I've signed up, right? I'm here. I'm here to do my public service. I'm prepared to commit and sacrifice and all the things necessary. And I'm not doing it for money or power. I don't need that. If I wanted money or power, there's a lot of things I can do. Running for office is not the one that's going to probably get me either of those or more of it. I'm doing this because I'm deeply concerned about the state of the world. I truly think that we're doomed if we don't do something different. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. It's like we're running in circles. We have no aim. Where are we going, right? What is our destination as a nation? Ask yourself that. Where are we going? What is our goal? Because as Americans, there is a responsibility. Each and every one of us have to ask ourselves these questions. Where are we going? Where do we want to go? What kind of future do we want to live in? What are our values? What are our principles? What do we stand for? One of the problems we have right now is people are not voting for things. They're voting against things. And it's one of the things you mentioned is how am I going to compete with? I'm not running against anyone. I'm running for everyone. And that's, I think, one of the main things that we have to change. And that's at an individual level is remember, one of the most important things, why are we here? Why are we here on this earth? What is our life all about? And I'd make the argument that one of the core reasons we're here is we're here to learn to act according to our conscience, to do what we believe in, to do what we believe is right. And when it relates to our elections, the same thing is there. We shouldn't be voting against people. We should be voting for whatever it is that we believe in. We shouldn't be divided because we're told, oh, no, if you don't vote for this may happen. It's the same tactic that's been being used for 200 years to divide us. It's to convince us to act out of fear.
It's an interesting one because, how do you get people to really spend the time to know what they're voting for, not what they're voting against? It's really easy to get people to vote like against something, but it's really hard to get them to kind of understand all the issues, actually understand all the parts to the pieces of the puzzle. So how can people, or is it possible for the population to get there? And if so, how?
So I believe in us. So I'm convinced we can get there. Now the question is, do we choose to get there? And I'd say the future is going to happen to you, or it's going to happen with you. And so it requires people getting involved. It requires people leaning in and saying, my voice matters. My vote counts. I can make a difference. We can create the change that we want to see in the world. And that's where it starts. And I think that we've seen that. Look at what's just happened with this Reddit rebellion, right? And what's happening at GameStop. There's a movement that's starting to happen. I think that this is a watershed moment. We've had a very, kind of rude awakening in 2020 as we've gone through all of these, extreme challenges that have been presented by COVID. And but it's also broken all of our patterns. There's always a silver lining. There's always something positive you can find in almost all situations. There are, I guess, maybe some exceptions when people die or otherwise. But generally, there's always a valuable lesson to be learned from every experience we have. But our patterns have been broken. It's given us an opportunity to take a step back, get our house in order, both figuratively and literally, and start deciding, is this serving me? Is this working for me? And hopefully we're becoming more discerning and we're making wiser and better decisions. But people are starting to get engaged. I mean, the American people historically had a very bad track record of saving money. But these stimulus checks have gone out, perhaps because people couldn't go to restaurants or stores. They saved the money. I think that's a great thing that Americans are learning to save, but they didn't just put it in the bank. They went and opened up Robinhood accounts, that's a whole nother conversation, but
that's a good conversation too. Wow.
Just I'll make one pause there on a potential joke, and I can't say I know this is fact, but there's a lot of suspicion, that this Robinhood has secretly been working for the sheriff of Nottingham. That it's a possibility that their business model has been to steal from the poor and to give to the rich. And so definitely be wary. We'll see as all the facts hopefully come to light, what actually happened there. But the positive thing of all of that is like people are getting involved. I believe this is a watershed moment where like the people are empowered. We're seeing the beginning of the democratization of opportunity in this nation. Historically making money in the stock market, that was something that was limited to the elite. The fact that the retail is like not just participating, but moving markets, challenging, the powers that be.
Doing short squeezes on the hedge funds, like, wow.
This is really exciting stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like it's the Occupy Wall Street movement, that 99% movement all over again, but except for this time, it's like tactical. It's like, oh, we found a flaw in the same way they find flaws in us and exploit it. Now we're going to exploit it on them and hit them where it hurts, in the wallets. And GameStop has still been sitting around $50. They've, it obviously had that big run up to 300. But at $50, I mean, the line is still being held. And just for full disclosure, I bought $50,000 worth of GameStop at about 300, I think over 300, not with any expectation of making money. I bought the stock to hold it all the way, hold the line to the end, with an expectation that I may lose all of my money.
Yeah.
I did that because I think there's a line in the sand that's being drawn right now. And it's like, what side are you on? Are you with the people? And we're seeing that. I mean, crazy things. You saw AOC, Ted Cruz, and Donald Trump Jr., all agree, and they stood with the people. I think it's the only time they've ever agreed on anything. Other than maybe the sky is blue. But I mean, kind of amazing things to see. And then, to see Elon Musk and Chamath. And, by the way, Chamath is running for governor of California. If you're in California, that's awesome. And if you're in California, whatever you do, you definitely want to be looking at this recall vote. There is an opportunity for Californians, if they're not happy with their governor, to recall the governor, not telling you what to do, but something that everybody in California should be aware of. Because if we really want to build a better world, it starts with us being aware of the things that we can do and then making choices. We have to start to be empowered and to think, for ourselves, to be free thinkers, and not just to follow blindly. And that's what has me so excited about everything I'm seeing right now is I see less and less sheeple, and I see more and more people like taking a stand. And it gives me great hope.
So it seems these platforms and the growth of the platforms, the Reddits and everything like that that's happening, and the ability for people to actually collectively group and take action, it's like the first time in history that it's come to this level of sophistication. And I am very aware of how you can always see a little bit into the future based on your history, right? And so how do you see the digital communities contributing to change, like in the elections? Like, is it kind of similar to the Reddit thing? Like, is it that kind of approach where people come together for the first time? I mean, they're distributed, but they're together, like in terms of their focus. Like, is that what you're seeing? That collective community coming together on a cause and kind of making a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I that's one of the things that telecommunications, right? Communications have changed. They're allowing communities of people to be connected all over the world in essentially real time. You can be anywhere and be connected based upon a common interest, a common goal. And so this networking, this connectivity is fundamentally making very big changes that we haven't fully yet even realized or utilized in all the ways that we can. and we're going to continue to see more and more of these things happen. And I think, what we've seen with the Reddit rebellion, I think whatever happens here, even if we lose all of our money, it's like the movie 300, right? This is Sparta.
Yep.
Sadly, in that story, the 300 died in that battle, but then the Greek army came together and won the war.
Yeah.
And so, whatever happens here, continue to stand up for what you believe in. And, if ever there was a moment or a time where it's important to speak your mind, right? To be clear, it's definitely it. We are living through some very, very challenging times, and they're going to be challenging for the years to come. Even if, let's just say, COVID disappeared today and tomorrow is a new day, the ripple effects of what's happened here are going to be felt for a long time. 50% of small businesses have failed or will fail as a result of this. The mental health issues that America and the world is facing as a result of this. An entire generation of kids that have had a year of education disrupted, and we know kids need consistency. And whatever trauma we face as young people, it takes sometimes our whole lives. Sometimes they're never even dealt with. The economic carnage, 26% of all US dollars ever created were created last year.
Wow.
With no end in sight. That is frightening.
What do they call that? Quantitative easing, isn't it?
Yeah. And so it's and if ever, there's two ways that you can respond to all that information. It's like, oh, wow, this is really frightening. And yes, it is. And we can, continue to stay, locked in our houses, which you can do, or we can, you can still be locked in your house if you want, but, or you can get involved. The world needs us all right now. I mean, if ever there was a moment where every one of us matters, every one of our lives matter, every single one of us has the ability to make an impact in the world at a time where it's really needed. I would just hope that, you find your motivation, whatever it is that, can get you inspired enough to be one of those agents of change, because, if not now, when? This certainly feels like the time to me.
Sounds like you want to have an impact in the world, and it sounds like you see a little bit over the horizon where others can't, and I think you see opportunity, which is really interesting as well. Let's jump now to something else which you're working on, which is called Integro. What is Integro?
Yeah, so Integro is the name is the name of our foundation down in Puerto Rico, which is the main place where I live. And in Spanish, it has two meanings depending upon the inflection. One is integrity. The other is integration. And so the idea is someone that isn't from Puerto Rico that moved there. The idea is that I wish to integrate with integrity, to be there to help support and serve the Puerto Rican people and the Puerto Rican institutions and the island and the land of Puerto Rico. And so I originally kind of committed my life to public service about 4 years ago. And when I made that sort of commitment to see how I could help, recognizing and concerned with all the things that I was seeing in the world, I'm like, well, what part of the United States is struggling the most? And I was like, well, it looks like Puerto Rico. And I had started a bank there back in 2014. So I'd already been familiar, and I used to visit in my teenage years. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to move down to Puerto Rico. But I didn't know when. And I'm like, sometime in the next few years. And then Hurricane Maria hit in 2017, the fall of 2017, that devastated the island. And I'm like, ooh, this is really bad timing. But if I've committed to moving to Puerto Rico to help, I guess now is the time. I can't tell myself I'm going to do this and not go now. And I'm like, I guess here we go. And so I moved down to Puerto Rico in the midst of the longest blackout in U.S. history to see how I could be helpful. and not really knowing anybody, not even speaking the language, but like, let's go figure it out and see how we can help. And so one of the first things I did is set up this foundation, and we've been doing a bunch of incredible work on the island. If you'd like to learn more, you can check us out at in Integro .org.net. I think maybe even .com, but it's Integro. We're on social media, and we've supported 175 different organizations in Puerto Rico. In the beginning of COVID, we donated $1 million worth of masks, KN95 masks, to first responders, buying food from farmers. We support the preservation of the Puerto Rican parrot. It looks like we're going to be doing some work for the Olympics and the Puerto Rican Olympic team. And basically, we do everything you can think of, because I think from the earlier parts of this conversation, I'm a curious person. So instead of like saying, oh, here's the one thing I'm going to support in Puerto Rico, I'm like, let me do a little bit of everything. And that's for me really a way to at least get a basic understanding of all the issues. And then once I have all the information, I can start saying, where are the voids? Where are the holes? What are the things that are not happening? What are the big things that need to be done that aren't being done? So I can do those things. And so this is, sort of what that process has been.
Well, what are some of the strategies which you would advise other people who run foundations? Have you figured out that kind of help the success of that foundation? Because not every foundation is equal, and not every charity is as successful as every other charity. And so what are some of the things which you've learned, which you can share about kind of how to have the biggest impact in the foundation itself?
So in this area, this is where, I'm my weakest, because this was not a skill set that I had when I embarked on this mission.
That's what you said earlier. That was the one exception, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I had very little. I had none of the skills, other than maybe I knew people with money. That was my one skill. That I guess
arguably maybe the most important one.
I guess we're building a nonprofit or a charity. Yes.
Yeah.
And so, wow, it was much harder than I thought. But anytime you embark on a new thing, every time you start from scratch, it is never an easy endeavor. It doesn't matter how many times you've done it before. And when you venture out of the things that you know and have experience with, it's especially hard. And so I've given money to charities my whole life. But there's a big difference between giving money to charity and running a charity. And so the first year was very difficult. And just trying to figure out, like, what do we do? Where do we go? And so the first year was, I'll take a step back and I'll talk about the things that I think can be helpful to anyone else doing this. And so having a background in business, in capitalism, I think of myself as a conscious capitalist, as someone that thinks through the holistic impact of my actions and the things that I do, right? I'm not going to do things that are going to have a negative impact in the world. Back to my mandate of like what I won't do and what I will do. Mm-hmm. There's so many ways to make money, and there's so many ways to give money, and there's so many things that one can do with their time. Choose wisely. You really do have more of a choice than you realize. And so really do the things that you feel good about, the things that make you proud. And what you'll learn is as you do that, you'll just do everything better because you're proud of the work that you're doing, and it'll impact everything that you do and the quality of the things that you do. And so as a capitalist, though, we have this thing, return on investment, and, there's accountability and all these measurements. One of the things that I've noticed in a lot of the philanthropic world is there's a lack of transparency, there's a lack of accountability, there's a lack of metrics. And this other thing, when most charities receive money, they get $1, you give them $1 and maybe 10, 20, 30 cents goes to the underlying cause. And as an investor, as a business person, that would be a failed business. That's a bad business model. And even if I gave $1 to a charity, if only $1 went to the underlying cause, there's no return. And so I'm looking for a return on impact. I'm taking the same things that I learned in business and I'm trying to apply them to philanthropy, meaning I want to give money to things that can have multiplier effects. And so like with those COVID masks, I put in $333,000. And I went and convinced Binance, a big crypto exchange, to 2-to-1 match me. And so I gave away $1 and I got someone else to give me $2. I got a multiplier on my money. And if I had more time and it wasn't a state of emergency, I probably could have been done better, but that was like, okay, good enough, let's go, right? And so these are the things that I'm always trying to do. And now I'm also starting to study how government works and how you tap into government funding and things of that nature to create positive outcomes and impacts. And I think I'm going to get to the point that everything I do from an impact perspective that is not like a social impact business thing, but the work I do in government, policy, and philanthropy, I think that I'll average at least 5, maybe 10 to 1 on my money, which is something that is not typical in philanthropy. And everything that I'm doing in this regard, I will be publishing information. I believe in this open source movement. So everything I learn, I will continue to publish and share in such a way that the whole world can benefit or replicate if they wish. Another thing that we're working on in Puerto Rico right now is we have a number of different programs, but one interesting one is the idea of giving just $500 to call it 20. We haven't finalized the numbers. It's almost should be done before the end of this quarter, but call it to 25 different nonprofits a quarter. So we're giving to 100 organizations a year, and it's a small amount of money. But what you're doing is you're just kind of like spray and pray. You're putting a little bit of money into a bunch of different organizations, and then you see which ones actually send a follow-up email, a thank you letter. And you just basically have some criteria of, did you do the following 1, 2, 3, 4? Oh, 5. They did the 5 things that we didn't even like take a meeting, right? We just gave a little bit of money to a bunch of organizations to see what comes back. And for those that met those qualifications, then they get $5,000 donations, and then we have a conversation with them. And if they meet that criteria, then they might get 25,000 or 50,000. And the idea is like the same concept of Y Combinator and accelerators, taking some, basically doing this reverse sort of philanthropic accelerator model where you're putting money into a lot of organizations, see what happens, and then basically do follow-on sort of donation. And what I've learned is supporting small charities, a dollar goes much further. Like a lot of those organizations, the management, there's no overhead. Literally, they're just good people doing a lot with very little. And so, I don't profess to be an expert in any of this. I'm 3 years in though, and I finally feel like I'm starting to get a handle on things, and I'm about to start, I think in this 4th year, it's where I'll start to innovate and do some things that are interesting, big and bold, and may make an impact beyond just the work that our organization and the organizations we work with are doing.
And for you to say that, that means it's going to be big and bold, just to be clear, based on your successes in life so far. We just have some quick fire questions, and then we'll begin to wrap up. It's 5 questions which I like to ask all the guests. Number 1, what book has had the biggest impact on your success?
Biggest impact on my success.
You've had a lot of them.
Well, so I'm just going to go with the first book that comes to mind. And this is an odd book, but it was The Count of Monte Cristo. It was the story of Edmond Dantes, and this is back when I was a younger person. Just kind of the tenacity of there he was locked in that prison cell, and the tenacity of eventually, being able to free himself and all the things. It's a story of that. And then ultimately a story of redemption. But that was the first one that came to mind.
Yeah, great. I love it.
Tenacity.
Love it. Number 2, what's your number 1 piece of advice for hiring awesome people?
Finding out what motivates them. What is their motivation? Because that's really where you want to align. What drives that person? What is it that is inspiring them and moving them? Because that's what you're looking for. You're trying to find your tribe. You're going to have different skills, and you want people with different and varying skill sets, but you want that commonality where you've got shared purpose or mission.
Yeah, great. Now, number 3, what's your best time management or productivity tip?
Time management and productivity tip. Make sure to give yourself ample time for creativity. It's called don't overly structure and don't overly schedule. You're trying to find that balance of structure and sort of chaos. You're leaving yourself ample space for those sort of the creative stuff to flow, but then creating enough structure that you can actually execute and accomplish everything that you need, and the continual striving to find that balance.
Yeah, I was about to say that would be like a lifelong challenge to find that balance. It's a continuous struggle. Number 4, what's the best piece of business advice that you've received?
I'd say the best piece of business advice is to pursue again your passion. A lot of people in business are, trying to pursue money. When money is your objective, when money is the goal, what you'll find is you generally don't get it. When your goal is to provide a product or a service and to do something that you're passionate about, you end up doing it very well, and then money becomes the byproduct of it. And so the main piece of advice I'd give with business is, it's not all about the money. If you do good work, the money will follow.
And last one, how do you relax after a crazy day in the office?
These days it tends to vary. Right now, I'm probably going back into a book phase. I'm having a dry February, so I try to take 1 month out of the year and not socialize and have any drinks or anything. And obviously, I chose the shortest month of the year.
Love it.
But right now, I want to finish the last couple episodes of Mandalorian. It depends on what my mood is. Sometimes I need something active. Sometimes I need something passive. Sometimes it needs to be exercise. Right now, I'm getting up every day before sunrise and making sure that I meditate and and create that space for me, just so that I'm not like up and where I've got an hour or two in the morning where I'm not like I can do whatever it is that I feel like doing, and giving myself that space to just step into the day calm and composed.
Yeah, great. And just one final point. For the people who are listening or who are viewing this, so what's the one action which you'd like them to take? If there was one action that you'd like them to take, what should they do? What site should they go, or what should they do?
I'd have to say, considering everything going on with cryptocurrency today, I would never encourage anyone to invest in anything. But what I would encourage everyone to do is to invest in themselves. If you can afford it, go buy like $10 of Bitcoin. I'm not encouraging you to invest in Bitcoin. I'm encouraging you to invest in yourself. This is something that is likely to have a very big impact on the world. And by doing this, you are empowering yourself so that you can make informed decisions for yourself in the future. So you don't have to listen to someone else say, hey, this is what you should do. I'm trying to give you the knowledge and the information so that you can make empowered decisions for yourself going forward. And, cryptocurrency is clearly one of those things that I think everybody should at least be familiar with.
Brock, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing about everything which you've done in your life. And it's been very impressive, from child actor to internet entrepreneur to blockchain entrepreneur, to the US presidential candidate and philanthropy. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story today, mate. Thank you.
I really appreciate being here. Alex, thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And hopefully we get to do this again.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brock. See you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Growth Manifesto podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. For more episodes, please visit growthmanifesto.com/podcast. And if you need help driving growth for your company, please get in touch with us at webprofits.io.